Hello guys, and welcome to a new Steel Division video today by me, Vulcan. Today I have for you another battle group overview, this time looking at the 352nd Infantry Division. In this video I'm going to be talking through my choices, how the units complement each other and why I've brought them in. So let's start off with the Recon tab. So in the Recon tab it's pretty simple. I have one card of Aufklärer. These are the two-man recon squad. You keep them stealth, they can move into enemy territory unseen, and they don't affect the front line. Really useful for just gaining your standard information very cheaply. And they also come with the Kubel MG, which does have that machine gun, which is actually relatively useful in certain situations. Just keep it at distance, max range preferably, and it will help you pin down enemy units. Next up, I have some Fusiliers. These guys I've really started to rate. I've really found a good use for 9 strength recon squads recently, and I find that they really complement not only fire support like IG-18s and Flak 88s, but also just accompany Osttruppen and Grenführer really well. Especially the Fusiliers in this deck because they have the 1-star experience, which is exceptionally useful. Next up I have a card of SPW 204. This is just a singular vehicle in this card, and it's really useful in the early game for dealing with enemy APCs and half-tracks because it does have a 17 round per minute 5 AP power cannon, which is really good for the early game. I don't take any in the late game simply because I don't have enough cards, and I find that I use the majority of my recon in phase A, especially these Fusiliers. I've also been tempted to recently drop out the Aufklärer for more Fusiliers, because Fusiliers actually affect the front line. They're a recon squad that can do that, which is very awesome and extremely useful. Let's move on to infantry. In the infantry tab I have first of all the Grenadier Führer. The Grenadier Führer is actually quite nice in this deck. It does come with a smoke grenade, which is useful, and just in general this squad is necessary for the extra command availability, since in the support tab you don't get any command units, so having extra command in your infantry tab is actually pretty important. Then I have a card of Osttruppen, which are pretty standard infantry with the disheartened mechanic. Then I've got 2 cards of the Grenadiers with 1-star experience. Now I normally wouldn't have these Grenadiers if they weren't higher experience, because they are actually exactly the same as Osttruppen, just without the disheartened trait. And this disheartened trait doesn't really matter when it comes to the role in which you are using this kind of infantry. Infantry like Osttruppen and Grenadiers without Panzerfaust aren't made to be like super aggressive. You can use them quite aggressively to make ground just by running them up and sort of almost suiciding them in their vehicles, but in general the idea is that you get into a position and you just hold it, and these guys are just like meat shields for your fire support, and that's what I would generally recommend you using them for. But in this case, Grenadiers with 1-star experience, 2-star experience with Grenadier Führer next to them can be extremely effective and very useful for just an extra 5 points apiece. Then I have 1 card of the MG42s. Again, these are 1-star experience. The only reason I'm bringing them in, otherwise I'll probably have another card of Osttruppen. And 2-star MG42s are actually pretty damn effective in the early game. Moving into phase B, there's a lot of choices in this deck, but I'm going to be taking the card of 10 Ersatztruppen. This gives you 10 infantry squads for 10 points apiece. That's like 1 tick in B phase, gives you all of your Ersatztruppen, and imagine how much you can affect the front line with 10 infantry squads. Really useful just to back up your infantry, and you use these very defensively, and they just hold their ground for absolutely ages. Obviously they are disheartened, so be careful of like mortar fire and combined infantry pushes, but if they're supported by Grenadiers and Osttruppen, you should be okay. And if they have a Grenadier Führer or a Pioneer Führer nearby, then they're not going to surrender anytime soon. Next up, I have a card of the Pioneer Führer. Again, like I was saying earlier, it's important to have command infantry in this deck because there isn't any command vehicles available in the support tab. Then I have a card of the Stoßtrupp. Now these Stoßtrupp are different to the other decks in that they don't have a Panzerfaust. However, they are extremely effective against infantry. They have 18 AP power, and if they have a command unit nearby, they are 3-star veterans. They will demolish infantry squads at close range. That is just simply how good they are. They do need to be within 100-meter range to be that effective. So use your smoke grenades to get close and take down those infantry squads in close quarters combat. If you are trying to use these to fight across the open, you will lose every time. So don't waste these guys. They're 15 points apiece, which is pretty cheap. Just look after them and make sure that they are in cover as much as possible. There is 2 more squads that you can get at these, and if I'm playing on like a more forest-based map, I might even make a deck that has more of these in, because they are exceptional in close combat. Finally, I have a card of 4 Grenadiers. These guys are 1-star experience. You can get cards of 6 of them, which, I don't know, it's kind of a trade-up. I think that I would preserve enough infantry using Ersatztruppen and Osttruppen to afford to bring in slightly more experienced Grenadiers. But I can see why people would possibly like switch out a Grenadier, for example, with the experience for Grenadiers without the experience. But in my case, I'm going to keep the experienced ones. Pioneers, not that great. In my opinion, it's worth having a Panzerfaust more than it's worth having a 22 AP grenade or HE grenade. Panzerfaust just way more versatile for taking out those pesky half-tracks and so on that are pinning down your troops. And then you can get a card of 5 MG42s in Phase B, and then in Phase C you can get cards of 6 Sturm Pioneers. I'm not really keen on only having 6 more units. Maybe if there was like an 8 card of Sturm Pioneers in Phase C, it might be worth bringing just for availability, but generally I'm going to avoid that. And MG42s in Phase B, I think what I have is just generally better value for this deck. Let's move on to tanks. So like I was saying before, command is pretty short in this deck. So I'm going to be focusing on bringing in the Befehl Panzer III in Phase A, 2 Befehl Panzer IIIs in Phase B, and the 4 Stugs in Phase C. So in Phase A you can get a Panzer III. It's only got 4 accuracy, and this thing will struggle to hit any armoured target with its main gun, but it is actually relatively good fire support with those 2 machine guns, and basically you'll use this as like a close range fire support vehicle alongside your infantry. That's what it's for. You can bring in the Panzer 35Rs in Phase A, but I find that I don't particularly use them and rely more on Phase A Pak 38s and also just infantry in general and support tab like the IG-18s. So in Phase B, 2 more of those, again for the same role, just to provide command and the MG support more than their actual main gun. And then in Phase C, I do have some Stugs just in case things need to be held. So if you've made ground and you're struggling to hold it, Stugs are actually quite good for holding ground because they have the 10 front armor, 14 AP. They aren't the best Stugs in the world. I wish these were Stug 4s, but 14 AP is still good enough to deal with most allied armor. Moving into support, I have IG-18s, and that's pretty much it. In Phase A, I've got 2 cards of the IG-18s to give me 4 of them, and I also accompany those with an Opel Blitz munitions truck. The Opel Blitz munitions truck is more for the artillery tab than the IG-18s because the IG-18s actually have 50 rounds of HE ammunition, which is incredible, and they're also useful for resupplying infantry. So yeah, IG-18s, since they've been buffed to 1000 meter range, really useful weapon and can destroy half tracks and anything with 2 armor basically. They can destroy and lower. So really useful in that respect. Don't bring in Flammenwerfers, 2-man squads, no veterancy, really bad. In Phase B, same thing, more Flammenwerfers if you want them, but not ideal. And then you can also get IG-33s. Now these are like majorly buffed IG-18s, and I've been tempted to bring these in, but I find IG-18s way more versatile. So IG-18s, they have more accuracy and they are faster, which is really useful for these weapons because you're going to be using them to advance with your infantry. Whereas like the IG-33 is incredibly slow, it's got lower rate of fire, it's got lower accuracy, so although it has like 27 HE, which is incredible, it's not going to be as effective as an IG-18 in supporting like infantry as you are moving, which is the reason I use IG-18s in the first place. So the IG-33 to me just, I mean, if it had like extra accuracy, that's like the same accuracy, then I would consider it for sure, but in this case, definitely not. And then I have some more Opel Blitz munitions trucks. Again, for my arty tab, I do have quite a lot of artillery available on this deck. So yeah, that's what the Opel Blitz munitions are all there for. Let's move on to anti-tank. So this is a really interesting part of this deck, the 352nd. They are the deck that has the exclusive Jagdpanther, which is really, really nice. But before we get to that, let's talk about our Phase A. In Phase A, I'm going to be relying on Pak 38s and Panzerjägers. So Pak 38s are your concealed units. You can keep them in cover and just generally use bog standard AT with 1000 meter range. You definitely always want a card of this or similar in every deck, really, to hold the ground early on. Panzerschreck squads in this deck are kind of pointless. They don't have any veterancy, and they only come in a Kubel, so yeah, I don't know. I don't really feel like you need these in Phase A. As for Panzerjägers though, these guys are what I call Stuart killers. They have 9 AP and they have 10 rate of fire, which is really, really good. The 10 rounds per minute there, fantastic for taking on allied light tanks early in the game because they have like 3 more rounds per minute, which is, well, makes a difference for sure. They have the ability to shoot at both like tanks and infantry, which is really nice because they have HE on their gun. So they can also be used for that role if you've then after like killing enemy tanks, you want to focus on infantry. Their armor isn't great, so be careful with them. But they are definitely something to stand up to enemy Stuarts for only 55 points as well. Really cost efficient unit in my opinion, so definitely worth having a card of them on your deck early on. Moving into Phase B, I have some Pak 40s. These are the 1200 meter range 13 AP AT guns with HE value on their gun currently. I just find that, again, these guys are pretty standard. You want more AT guns in Phase B, obviously, to continue to hold the line, because AT guns are normally like the target of airstrikes and artillery all the time. So you're always having to like reinforce yourself with more. And in this case, this is the best you can get in Phase B other than Pak 43s. But I don't think you necessarily need a Pak 43, and you only get one of them per card. And considering the other cards I have on my anti-tank, I feel that they are more valuable. Now, instead of having a Pak 40, you can obviously go for the Marder 2. But the Marder 2 I find is too brittle. And if you rely on these too much, what can happen is like a 50 cal can come along and side shot this thing and blow it up, which is quite annoying to say the least. You would have to keep them at max range at all times. I would consider bringing in Marder 2s if they had more experience, but in this deck they do not, so I rely on the concealment of the Pak 40 to take out enemy units. Moving into Phase C, I have one card of the Pak 43s. I would have more if they had veterancy, but in this case they don't, and you get 2 per card with the 22 AP power. The Jumbo Killers definitely necessary moving into Phase C. Alongside those, you can also bring in Jagdpanthers. And Jagdpanthers cost 300 points for basically a mounted hull, which is quite heavily armoured on the front. So 15 front armour, which is really good against Shermans and so on. It's like 1 less armor than the Firefly has AP, so it can be penetrated in the front by a Firefly. Be wary of that. But still, a 22 AP power gun, 1200 meter range with 7 accuracy, pretty damn good. So yeah, if you keep this near a command unit like one of your Panzer IIIs, these are going to be 3-star. Their rate of fire and accuracy is going to be greatly increased, and they will slaughter enemy units at max range. Just don't let them get too close to anything, and don't let them get side shot, because their side and rear armor is terrible. Now, I have always been tempted to bring in more Pak 43s, and the reason for this is because of the price. This is something that we definitely have to talk about. The price of a Jagdpanther is 300 points, which is like basically 2.5 Pak 43s. And that's something you definitely want to consider, which is why I don't bring in, for example, these cards of 2 Jagdpanthers. Because these Pak 43s are much more, or much easier and relied upon for reacting to the enemy, as opposed to a Jagdpanther where you have to wait a couple of ticks of income in order to buy one. In this case, you would have to wait for 3 Phase C minutes in order to get a Jagdpanther, which is pretty crazy. And that's why I rely more on a Pak 43, which you can buy 1 of every minute. Let's move on to anti-air. The anti-air tab in this one's pretty simple. You have Flak 88s, you want to bring Flak 88s. Any deck that I think on the German side that can bring in Flak 88s, I would recommend doing so. They are incredibly good units. They have not only the ability to shoot at aircraft as anti-air roll, but they have 5 HE for destroying infantry and 15 AP for destroying tanks. Nothing can get close to these. So the ideal way to like counter a Flak 88 would be artillery and smoke. But then what you have to do is get maybe your Air Force to take care of that, whilst your Flak 88s take care of the rest. So that's just something to consider. I love Flak 88s. I think they're amazing. In Phase A, I have Flak fillings. I don't bring them in too often. They're just there in case I need a little bit extra fire support on the ground. 800 meter range isn't fantastic though. And yeah, I don't know. I just don't tend to bring these in too much. I've got them on the deck just to almost fill a slot, as I rely mostly on my Flak 88s moving into Phase B. But these guys can be useful. Say if like you're playing against a French deck, or a deck that has a lot of Phase A aircraft, like somebody who's using double Spitfire in Phase A. You bring in a couple of these, you keep them almost hidden, and then you bring in your own aircraft to bait the Spitfires over them, and you can shoot down both the Spitfires. That is how you would do that in Phase A. So for 140 points, you get 2 of these. You use that to counter the 125 point Spitfires, and with another 120 point ME-109, and you will hopefully shoot down both of the Spitfires, or at least one, and get your money back for these Flak fillings. And obviously the BF-109 at that point is still useful, so there you go. And same with these, they are useful throughout the game. By the way, let's move on to artillery. In the artillery tab, I am not going to be bringing in these 81mm mortars. I have considered swapping out a card of these mortars actually for 81mm mortars, because these 81mm mortars actually have 1200 meter range. And for 70 points, it's quite good for Phase A because they're cheap. Now, I would recommend, however, if you can afford it, bringing in the 120mm, because 1600 meter range is even more useful and allows you to counter battery enemy mortars in Phase A from a distance. Furthermore, they have 8 strength compared to the 6 strength of these mortars, so these mortars aren't going to go away anytime soon, even with airstrikes hitting them and so on. So that's why I really rate these 120mm mortars in Phase A. I've also got a card of the FK-18s in Phase A. I actually haven't been bringing these in too much recently, so I should probably trade that for FK-18s in Phase B. And these FK-18s, they're 80 points. You can spam quite a lot of these. They give you 9 HE for 2000 meter range. Really good for like pinning down units at the 2000 meter range. Just keep them at max range and use them to pin down enemy units really cheaply. It's really nice. Furthermore, the Nebelwerfer 41, similar sort of role, but more of a shock and awe tactic. If you're planning to assault a particular area with infantry, and like suicide charge towards it, Nebelwerfer it first, and all of those units that will be defending it will be panicked and stunned and so on. Then you want to be using smoke with your 81mm to cover the advance as you move up. And that's how really you would use artillery in this deck. Again, remember that you do have the Opel Blitzes in the support to resupply them, so you shouldn't really be running out of ammunition in this deck. And that's pretty much my artillery tab. Let's just have a look quickly at the other options that you can bring in. I do have the SK-18s in Phase B. These are pretty much there as an option aside from Nebelwerfers and FK-18s for counter-battering larger artillery. So for example, an FK-18 only has 2,000 meter range. A enemy or allied artillery, they normally have about 2,400 meter range, whereas an SK-18 has 4,000 meter range. So if you're struggling against enemy long-range artillery, SK-18s are the weapon of choice just to stun them and stop them from being effective throughout the game. Really, really useful for that. They are quite supply heavy, so they will be using that up, but you got plenty of it, so there's no problem. The other things we can look at are the 173mm field battery from this BEO Panzer. This is, again, it's more of one of those sort of shock and awe kind of things. Like if you're going to attack a position, you would use it on that position before you move forwards, or if you maybe spot an emplacement of like AT guns with like a Recon nearby, it might be worth RTing it. This can be useful for that. And it does have 18 HE, which isn't too shabby. But basically, I would always use a Nebelwerfer instead. And Nebelwerfers are 60 points, whereas this is worth 100 points. I don't know, I just find Nebelwerfers more useful in that case. Moving into Phase C, you can get your hands on these Nebelwerfer 42s. Really, really potent artillery unit with the 27 HE power. Does leave napalm on the ground and burns units alive. Really, really good unit, but waiting for Phase C for only one card on each, I don't know. I don't think it's worth it. Maybe a card of 3 Nebelwerfers in Phase C would be worth it, but I've got one card in Phase B, which does me nicely. 210mm heavy battery artillery off map in Phase C. Again, if it was like you got more than one on a card, I might consider it, but because you only get one per card, to me it's not worth it. And more SK-18s in Phase C, I used to have them instead of FK-18s, but I just found FK-18s just allow you to have so much more artillery that is just overwhelming for the opponents. So yeah, SK-18s in my opinion just too expensive to have too many of them, and you'll be spending loads of points trying to bring them all in, which I never end up doing. So that's why I've decided not to bring them in anymore. Let's move on to the air tab. The air tab's pretty small in this deck. You get 4 cards available. And what I've done in this one is focus mainly on fighter supremacy and then a couple of support units. So don't bring in Recon aircraft. They're just terrible for multiplayer. They're all right in single player in your campaigns, but in multiplayer, don't bring them in. They get shot down. They're way too expensive and yeah, just not very useful. Ju-87Ds, again, same thing, not really that great. 5 HE power bombs don't do too much. However, I do have a card of the MU-109G Zeros, and you get 2 of them in Phase A. Really, really nice card that to counter enemy aircraft. Like I was saying with the flak filling strategy, if somebody's spamming you with Spitfires in Phase A, bring out one of these alongside your flak fillings, bait them over the flak fillings, and then shoot them down. Easy done. It's not always that easy, but in theory it should be. Either way, moving into Phase B, one card of the Focke-Wulf 190 A8s. These guys have 600 km/h speed. Really good cannons for shooting down enemy aircraft. And it's always tempting to bring in like the up-vetted version. But I think for this deck you need the availability in the air because you only have 4 cards available. So that's why I've got the card of 2 Focke-Wulf 190s. Then I have a Ju-87G. This is the Ju-87 with the 2 37mm guns with 12 AP power. Really, really strong unit, and with the 2-star veterancy, really does hit its targets hard. It has increased accuracy and rate of fire with the 2 stars, which allows it to hit units very, very hard. So really nice unit to have. Make sure it's covered by your fighters, otherwise you'll lose it, and it's quite a good asset. And you just don't want to lose it really. Other choices for Phase B are the Focke-Wulf 190G3. You could use these to replace your Focke-Wulf 190A8 if you wanted the same Focke-Wulf with sort of more multi-role capacity, but the Focke-Wulf 190A8 actually has more HE power on its main guns because it has 2 more machine guns or 2 more cannons, as opposed to only 2 cannons and 4 bombs. In my opinion, having the Focke-Wulf 190A8 is much better, and you can use the A8 to strafe ground units very well with the 8 HE power it provides. The G3, however, it's basically allowing you to stun instantly as opposed to over time. The ME109 G2 R1, I used to have this in my deck, but I kind of dropped it. I had it because the 1 HE power or the 115 HE power bomb was good enough to basically one-shot a lot of 5 strength units, 5-6 strength units. But I found that just having air supremacy with fighters and pinning down those units on the ground and then using other units to destroy them worked better. So yeah, I just didn't find these great because they're really slow and they end up getting shot down by enemy aircraft quite a lot if you don't maintain air supremacy, which is pretty important. So that's why I've preferred to take fighters over these. Then in Phase C, I do have a card of the Ju-88S with the 2 25 HE power bombs. I really like these guys for just punching a hole in the enemy defenses and blowing up those vital units that the enemies have. Make sure these hit the right target and they will do you wonders. You can also get access to the HS-129B3 in Phase C with the 18 AP power main gun. If these were like up-vetted with like 1 or 2 stars, I might consider bringing these in Phase C instead of like a Ju-87, but in my opinion, because it's not up-vetted, just not really worth having, and I'd rather have a Ju-87 in Phase B when it's more useful. So there we go. That is all of my deck. Just going to save that, we'll back out, and we'll talk about how units complement each other and how I would play this deck in like a 1v1, 2v2, 3v3 scenario and so on. So my main sort of startup for this deck, especially in like the early game and setting up around the 500 points that you have at the start of the game, I would go with like a Fusilier, like 1 squad of Fusiliers, 1 squad of Osttruppen, 1 Grenführer, and maybe like an IG-18 on like every strong position that you want to try and capture, or each part of the map you want to head towards. That combination I found was so strong, because the IG-18 is your fire support from long range. It can target both vehicles and your like the enemy infantry, and then you have the Osttruppen to move forwards with the Fusiliers who are providing recon, and the Grenführer to provide you with the extra veterancy. So you keep the IG-18 within the range of the Grenführer. That's the idea, to give the IG-18 extra accuracy and rate of fire. Also, you want to be bringing along the Pak-38s to the flanks where you think you're going to be hit by vehicles. Generally, the flanks that are led straight to by roads, because that's where the vehicles are going to end up quickest. So, yeah, take your AT guns to those positions to cover off those roads, and then have your squads of Fusilier, Osttruppen, and Grenführer IG-18s move forwards under cover of those Pak-38s. If you need to react to anything, use the Panzerjägers if they're bringing in like Stuarts and so on, and they're trying to cross like a field where you hadn't had an AT gun. Come up and ambush them with a Panzerjäger, really good for getting into position for that. Then as you move into Phase B, it's all about the Ersatztruppen spam. Bring in all of them, spread them across your front line, bring in more IG-18s to support them, bring in more AT guns, start bringing in your Flak 88s. Those things are absolutely dominant in the game at the moment. So yeah, just continue to bring in your Recon. Like if you haven't used up all your Recon yet, bring in that alongside Ersatztruppen, alongside Flak 88s and AT guns, and you're all good. It's pretty much what you want to be going for. If you want to continue to push, then you want to be bringing in your mortars and so on. Mortars to support you in Phase A are really good for providing smoke support. In phase B, bring in the Nebelwerfer if you really want to like hit a position and charge it. And as you are charging it, smoke your men off to get into the position. The only thing that I would say is like if you're attacking a position, use Sturmtrupp and Grenadiers as opposed to like your Ersatztruppen and Osttruppen, because what will happen is if you try and charge people with like Osttruppen and Ersatztruppen, is they'll get pinned down and they'll surrender really quickly. Obviously, unless you have a command unit nearby, but they'll definitely get pinned down anyway, and they won't actually make ground. Even under like smoke cover, they'll just get pinned down so quickly. So rely more on like Sturmtrupp and Grenadiers to actually make you the ground, and then reinforce them afterwards with more Ersatztruppen. That's what you really need to do. If you're being hit by long range RT, smash them with SK-18s. If they don't have much RT, bring in loads of FK-18s and smother them. If you're being hit by Spitfires in phase A, bring in the ME-109s with the Flakvilling combo, and moving into phase B, just continue your air presence with the Focke-Wulf 190s before you decide to bring in the Ju-87s and the Ju-88s. So I'd recommend having like all of your fighters available before you even think about bringing in the other two cards of aircraft. And that's basically it. Moving into phase C, you've got your Jagdpanthers, and that's pretty much it. Just use them to reinforce and crush the enemy. You don't really have much else available in phase C, so that's pretty much it. There you go. That is my look at the 352nd Infantry Division. I've told you guys how I play it. Now let me know how you guys play it and what sort of decks you have, and if you agree with my unit choices. I always love to hear your opinions in the comments. But in the meantime, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.